Good evening, everyone. Namaskar. Welcome to the first session of the International Virtual Mediation Summer School 2021, which has been hosted and organized by Nivaran, mediators of the Supreme Court of India. My name is Anil Srivastav, and I am the host moderator for today's session. Over the course of the next 8 days, you will be addressed by and you will get to interact with some of the most outstanding judges, lawyers, teachers, and professionals from the field of mediation. Today's session on mediation starts from the beginning. That is, it traces the historical perspective of dispute resolution, development of legal systems, and culture. In one way, you can say that today's session is about the jurisprudence, the foundation, and the legal principles behind mediation. And speaking on this subject is Ms. Uma Ramanathan, a renowned mediator, mediator trainer, and author on mediation. Ms. Ramanathan is the coordinator, Tamil Nadu Mediation and Conciliation Center, the High Court of Madras. She is also the managing trustee, the Foundation for Comprehensive Dispute Resolution. And her areas of interest are, well, while most of us might have areas of interest which range from maybe cycling and swimming and trekking and reading, her areas of interest are study of legal culture, jurisprudence and metaphysics, psychology and philosophy, conducting workshops on conflict assessment and management mediation. She is the author of a book called Resolve to Resolve. She has written articles which have been published in various journals on mediation and on e-websites. Uma ma'am will trace the origins of the concept of law, justice, and equity, the close relationship between society and justice, how transformation in society automatically leads to transformation in law. She will trace the march of law from tradition, natural law, to the early systems of law in Egypt and Hammurabi's code, the Arthashastra and Vidura Niti in ancient Indian thought. Uma ma'am will take you through to Roman law, the origin of the chancery courts. You will hear about the early Anglo-Saxon and Norman period of law, the establishment of the Privy Council, and how these developments change the inherent character of law from natural law to positive law, and how it has now come to find strength from equity and the resultant mediation-based resolution process. While Uma ma'am will take us through the entire gamut of development of the concepts of law, justice, and equity, and how these developments have led to mediation as a resolution-based process, with her permission, I would like to add a few words on mediation. The process of settling of disputes as opposed to litigation is as old as human civilization itself. You take the great civilizations like the Indus Valley, the Greek civilization, the Egyptian civilization, they all followed practices of settling disputes between the parties themselves or with the help of a third party or third neutral parties. Now, ancient Greek law, I'll just tell you, ancient Greek law provided for the settlement of disputes through arbitration in matters of inheritance, adoption, commerce, contract. Similarly, ancient Egyptian law encouraged reaching agreements to resolve conflicts rather than resorting to complicated laws. So you tried to resolve a conflict and tried and avoided going to the complicated law mechanism. And it's not just at the political or at the governance level, but even our religious texts ordained that we must try and settle our disputes through dialogue and preserve relationships. Now, I'll tell you, the Holy Bible in the book of Matthew instructs members to settle their differences privately with each other. And if this fails, they are to seek help in resolving the dispute. So again, the stress is on people trying to resolve dispute amicably and not try and go to litigation or go to courts or the dispute resolution mechanisms. Similarly, the Holy Quran, Islamic law supports the settlement of disputes in kinship so that brotherhood is maintained. Kinship, so that brotherhood is maintained. Now, one of the greatest advantages that we get to hear about mediation is that it settles disputes while preserving relationships. So the Quran talks about kinship and brotherhood. Similarly, in Mahabharata, which contains 18 chapters of the greatest spiritual thought and teaching that ever was and will be, the Holy Gita, we hear about the concepts of Sam or Sam, Dam, Bhed, Dand. Now, for those of you who are not so familiar with Hindi, I'll just explain these concepts. Sam or Sam is dialogue, samvad. You try and sit across a table and you try and sort out your differences, try and sort out your disputes through dialogue. Now, if that fails, then what happens? Now, this is best illustrated by what happened just before the Great War in the Mahabharata. Now, Shri Krishna, he goes as a mediator to the court of Dhritarashtra and he put forward some proposals for a mediation. So he tried some, that failed. So then comes Dam. What is Dam? Dam is price, exchange, a bit of give and take. You take some, you give some. Now, this is what we are taught in mediation, that you try and impress upon the parties that they should, give up a bit of their position and take something from the other. So Shri Krishna tries Dam. He goes to Duryodhana and he says, look, Duryodhana, you keep the kingdom, give the Pandavas 5 villages. That's all. Kingdom for you, villages for them. Duryodhana says, I'm sorry, cannot be done. You're talking about 5 villages. I'm not prepared to give these people that much land which fits at the point of a needle. So Dam fails. So then he went to Bhed. Now, what is Bhed? Bhed is trying to create differences, division, or confusion in the enemy ranks. So he tries Bhed with Karna. So he goes to Karna and he says, look, Karna, you really want to fight? These are your brothers and you are the eldest. Don't fight. You'll get the kingdom. You'll be the king. Karna says, I'm sorry, my lord. I'm bound by my oath of friendship to Duryodhana. Cannot be done. So Bhed fails. So then ultimately comes Dand, that is punishment, the Great War. So the entire trajectory of the dispute or conflict resolution was from Sam or dialogue or Nivaran. Now, what is Nivaran? Nivaran is redressal through dialogue. So the trajectory was from Sam, dialogue, to Dand, or in common usage today, you may say litigation. So from mediation to litigation. That was the trajectory of litigation, of dispute resolution. So what happened? So you may well ask, so what? So what happened? So what's the big fuss all about? So I'll tell you what happened. Well, what happened is that the British Empire decided to pay us a rather long visit. And in the visit, they also gave us the structured hierarchy, code systems, and governance through legislation. Now, nothing wrong with that per se. After all, the structured code system and governance through legislation has served us very well. But what happened in between is that instead of mediation, litigation became the first step towards dispute resolution. So you went from, so what happened is from Sam to Dan, that is from mediation to litigation. We went
We've lost him. I think we've lost connection.
Am I audible?
Now you're audible.
Okay. So litigation has become the norm and mediation has become the exception. Litigation became the favorite child, and mediation became the not unwanted, it became the neglected child. But now the result of the first step being of litigation being the first step in dispute resolution, the results are there before us. I needn't elaborate on that. But fortunately, there seems to be a course correction now. And it is gratifying to note that introduction of statutory pre-litigation mediation is fast gaining traction amongst our lawmakers. So we are once again going back to Sam or Nivaran or dialogue or mediation as the first step in dispute resolution. With these brief remarks, I now hand over the session to our distinguished speaker, Uma ma'am. But I would like to inform all the participants that Uma ma'am is very particular that this should be an interactive session. That is, you are free to ask her questions even during her address. Or in the alternative, you can do so at the end of the session, or you can send us your questions on the chat box, and we'll be happy to answer them within the constraints of time. Uma ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Anil. That was a great opening batsman, so I don't know. That's a hard act to follow. Namaskar to everyone. I am inviting all of you on this cruise of mediation to go through the troubled waters of what we find ourselves in, to find out some way to help people. I had a chance to meet Chief Justice Venkatachalaya, retired judge of our High Court, Supreme Court, last year. And he said, Uma, what is worrying is that we lawyers have forgotten the pain of the litigants. And that made me think that day. And that was what Justice Vasish Kokaram was saying yesterday. He was saying that he had all the arsenals, he had all the weapons when he was fighting for his client, and he went in full-fledged to get some order from the court, and he found that the judge, who was humane, asked the party, what do you want? And found out it was just a key, not an order. So somewhere along the line, I started wondering whether we have really understood what law is or what law means to us, or why was this whole system that came into place at all. Looking into Black's dictionary for the definition of law, I found that it is defined as a binding rule of action or conduct prescribed by a controlling authority and having binding legal force. Now, controlling authority, binding force, all that sort of seems very coercive and puts us into a frame saying, okay, this is the space within which you can operate. You can't operate beyond that. But is that the reason why we started getting law? If you look at the legal systems that have developed in any part of the world, those systems have developed only as a procedure or process for interpreting and enforcing this law. So then, Is the foundation for these legal systems really anchoring to what the society or the individual man needs? But if, on the other hand, if we look at what is legal culture, we find that there have been changes, there have been opportunities to look at different perspectives, because there is always the society's challenge to situations and the response paradigm, which makes us shift to look at alternatives. And maybe that is why we got these alternatives. But is that correct? So, when I was reading, I found that Lon Fuller, who has done a lot of work in this field of mediation, he has a distinct definition for adjudication and mediation, which makes a lot of sense. And he says adjudication is a social process of decision which assures to the affected party a particular form of participation, that of presenting proofs and arguments for a decision in his favor. So, what happens in adjudication in the court system or in an arbitration, any adjudication process, is that the affected party goes with a particular stand, he has a position, he believes in certain rights, he believes that he is entitled to certain things, and so he makes a presentation of his position and he has proof to augment that, and whoever is the deciding authority looks at that and makes a decision. Now, again, it's a person sitting, listening to somebody or listening to both parties and deciding in one person's favor. So, can we really say that they have understood the real pain of the litigants, or have they understood what is the want of that litigant? So, he goes on to say that the central quality of mediation is the capacity to reorient the parties, not by imposing rules, but by helping them to achieve a new and shared perception of their relationship, which Mr. Anil was referring to now. He said relationships are restored, perception changes, and what happens is there is a redirection of the attitudes and dispositions towards one another. Now, when we look at adjudication and we look at mediation, what is the difference? When there are disputing parties, when I have a difference of opinion with somebody else and I'm not able to talk to that person, I go to the other person, third party, and ask him to decide for me. So what does he do? He is impartial, he is neutral, but he looks at both sides, and whichever seems to have more authority of proof, he accepts that and he gives a decision. Whereas in mediation, what happens is this person is trying to find out what is the relationship. Again, it's a neutral third party, but what happens is this person is not imposing rules, but is finding out what is the bridge that connects them. What is a bridge that makes them perceive, that makes them change their perceptions? What is the reason for this attitude? There was a British born Indian. He was born actually in Tamil Nadu, later immigrated to UK. He's a psychotherapist. And he describes conflict as having three essential features. He says it's anxiety, defense, and feelings. So, mediation addresses all this. Did we get it only now? Have we evolved, as Darwin says, from where we were in the primate stage to coming here and understand and have now come to understand that relationships matter? We have to understand what are their anxieties, what are their feelings, and probe into that to find out how we can solve the disputes. But if you see that as early as very early in the eastern part of the world, you will find there has been a very evolved way of thinking. Of course, we in India believe that about 4,000 years ago itself, we had a philosophy which said, understand yourself, understand how you can not hurt another, how you cannot take away things from another, how you can be true to nature, and that is the concept of dharma. So the concept of dharma itself is not just a legal norm or a legal system, but it is a situation oriented act which helps you to bring harmony to the parties concerned or to the situation concerned. So truth itself is seen in India as having two facets, depending on the situation, and absolute truth. And so that is why we had a dialogue, a system of dialogue. Yajnavalkya and others talk about a system of dialogue where they say it's not an argument with the other. It's a reasoning where I try to put out what I'm trying to establish, and the other person also listens to me and understands. We may differ at the end, but what happens is in the process we understand each other. So, uh, I think in China also they had where Confucius says that if you want a rule of law and if you impose it on the parties, people will definitely disobey and will not be ashamed because of that. But if you help them to understand their virtues and help them what it is to do the right thing, then they will obey the order of the day. So, this sort of developed the Eastern culture to think that whatever is it that we think as a loss or gain in an interaction will affect not only at the personal level but also at a societal level. So, they were thinking more about how do you have a dialogue, how do you find out what is it that the other person needs. So, when I was looking up at this, and I found in China, very interestingly, in the Han dynasty, this Wu Yu, he used to manage that particular area. And if somebody had a fight about a property or had a difference with the other person, then he would retreat into the mountains and he would introspect to find out whether he had inculcated values in his people, he had taught them how to do an ethical act, how to understand what is the correct thing to do. So it was more of understanding what are the needs of the people, finding out how to help them. And I think he was a real mediator at that point. The Ming dynasty, on the other hand, had a hall of shining reason where elders were there and people went to them. And these elders helped them only to find a shared solution, which would be, which would help both parties to have a peaceful relationship. And from there evolved the Qing dynasty, where it was mandatory for parties to have a pre-litigation stage. If I had a dispute with somebody, I had to go to that person and say, look, let's have a dialogue, let's talk about it. Or I would find somebody who will be there to help us to have the dialogue. If that fails, then they would have to go to the village elders. Now, the village elders, they were not going to decide, but they would help them to avoid unnecessary litigation and they would advise them about how to have this dialogue. But if both of them fail, then they would go to the imperial authority. Now, the king is still way up. He doesn't interfere at all. Now, they would go to the imperial authority and he would again coax them to settle. Maybe it was conciliation at that point. But this has been a process that was there. On the other hand, in India, we had Kula, Srini and Puga. There were three kinds. One was within the family, within the community, because there was caste here. People who could understand the social customs, the norms followed in living. So they could, help them to decide on this particular dispute. But once people started moving out, they had trade relations and they had disputes relating to trade. Then it went to the person who they respected and who was appointed as the authority to deal with these trade disputes, and that was called as Srini. And the last one was Puga, where people from different communities could live in the same locality. And so, to understand that they had different cultures, different way of looking at things, this Puga system was there. From this evolved the Panchayat, where 5 people, they thought that having 5 people, it's a vote among the 5. 5 elders in the village who would sit there and talk to them. Now, Mr. Anil was referring to how in the Mahabharata they went. Yes, no one wanted to go directly and have a fight with the other person. The Samadhana Bheda Dand was, Dand is, you can say, punishment or going to a court or, taking very strong action. But before that, you had to try that. You had to go and talk to the other person. Try to find out whether it is possible to settle. So they usually said if it was a dispute within the family, if it was a dispute about property and the 2 brothers were fighting over the property, one person could give in to the other because it didn't matter, it was only part of the family. But if it was a dispute between 2 neighbors, then for useful enjoyment, someone had to give up something or the other person had to buy from that something, or they could understand how to reallocate the share and to enjoy the property. So it became dana or gift. Then Beda was when there is a lot of a power imbalance. And so how do you deal with it? And of all this, even if you're not able to deal with the power, then you go for the go to courts or whoever was going to address this. So even the sage Patanjali has said that it is important not to decide who is right or wrong, but it is important to decide how you can best resolve. So this was how there was a lot of attempts at, in the East at least, attempts to see that people had a dialogue and were able to settle. Now, if you look at Rome and Greece, which were far advanced also, what was happening was they had a system of philosophy. Now, we are talking about law and we are talking about justice. Now, even in this process, you would have seen culture has had a great impact. How people view things, how the community reacts to each other, what were the needs of the community. That has shaped the way that people were looking at things. Now, in ancient Greece, what happened was Plato said justice itself can be binary. It can be individualistic or it could be social. What he meant by individualistic was there is a balance and harmony in the soul of man, and that balance had to be touched if justice was done in that particular thing. Whereas in social, it was the harmony of the larger goals of the to maintain cohesion and harmony. So now, for me to understand that this is enough for me, I may not have the means, but I would want to buy a Jaguar. That is a conflict with my own self. But am I capable of buying that Jaguar? Do I have the capacity to buy that Jaguar? I don't think about it at all. So I think it's all right to steal or do something to gain the money for that. But is that okay for me afterwards, after I get the Jaguar? So that was what he is saying. So that's internal, way of thinking about the whole thing. That balance and harmony in the soul, that individualistic thing was one part of justice. The other part was maintaining the social cohesion. Now, how do we do the social cohesion? That is when people follow a certain set of norms about how to live. You cannot steal another man's property. You cannot take another man's wife. You have to see that you pay your taxes. There were so many things. So all these came slowly over a period when man started moving, agriculture earned something. So what is happening here? The culture that developed there was, once we decided that we are entitled to possession of certain things. That is why when trade started, people started thinking about how to regulate or how to see to it that they don't lose. So the basic ideals of justice itself was moral. It developed into legal, and there was a religious aspect also, where Thomas Aquinas was part of it. But if you see, the core ideals in all this was that they wanted security, they wanted justice. So, although we have a system of law, now what is justice? Is it different from law? If you really want to look at what is justice, because we generally say law, justice and equity, even it is Department of Law and Justice. Why is it different? It's because somewhere along the line we think what is fair, what is satisfying, and justice is understood more as what one owes to another. Why? Because I want to maintain harmony. So John Rawls has said that justice is a role of its a principle in defining rights and duties and in defining the appropriate division of social advantage. Now, what is the social advantage? Because I am in a position of power, I claim certain rights. Because I have a title to certain things, I claim certain rights. Now, is that enough for me to claim it and to acquire it? But what Rawls has said is that you have to understand what will define the rights and duties. So throughout the system, if you see, the traditions that have developed, as Mr. Anil was saying about in Greece, how they developed, in Egypt, how they developed, all that has been because of interaction of one person with the other, because of the need to go out of that particular community, out of the country to deal with other people. So they got cultures from other people also, just as we got the British culture here to establish the legal system later on. But what was happening was, through all this, it became need based to find out laws. So, what happened was, when the East already had a system of dialogue and looking at mediation, they looked at, when they were starting to do trade with European countries and other places, they looked at what was the manner of dealing with people there, and they found that they had a system of norms. So they also started finding out, how do we deal with this? And in that process, what happens? They decided that equity would be the best thing. So Roman law first developed the equity theory. They said it is the equity is a quality which ensures a fair and impartial conduct, but it ensures that there is a benefit that one gets in the exchange. So, what is the difference between justice and equity? It's very interesting that while law and to a certain extent justice has evolved to see that people follow a certain norm so that society lives in harmony, there is cohesion. Now, equity sends a ripple through that and makes you think about, is that really enough, or do I want substantive satisfaction for myself? So what is it that I am getting individually in this exchange? What am I getting out of this situation where I find that I am not in congruence with the other person? I am having a dialogue, I am listening to their laws, but what am I getting out of this? So there, the Romans developed what, although the kings were there again, they developed what is called as a praetor, who could go beyond what was the law to see what was the circumstance in which the dispute came, and then they could decide on that. This later became the basis for the chancery courts in England. And so, even though over the period, if you have seen that the Hammurabi Code came, then there was the Magna Carta later in England, again because there was a need to address the situation and to have something, fixed for people to follow. People did go through a situation where they felt that just following the law or the system was not enough. Circumstances sometimes deemed that you had to interpret what was the law or to find out a solution which would not be legally, which would not be beyond the legal structure, but would bring substantive satisfaction to all parties. So, while law was understood as to have a need to protect, a need to maintain peace, to bring orderly social change, and to bring social justice, the equity theory, what happened was, came about, and they said, they understood that men and women really don't want pain. They want to minimize pain. They are hardwired to maximize pleasure. And society tends to treat people only who reward them and punish those who treat them inequitably. So what happens was, to restore a sort of a psychological and actual equity, people understood that relationships mattered, or what was the dynamics of the relationship, and they started addressing that. And that is why this equity theory developed to a certain extent, that the common law, in the common law procedures also, the chancery courts gave way for not only interpreting the law, but to understand the facts and situations of the case and move from there. Now, while this was going on, there was a development of natural law and the positive law. While the natural law thought of the moral order, I can say the universal moral order, and what could be the norm that could govern human behavior, there was a sort of a legitimate structure that was ordained, and people were said that you have to act only within the structure, within this frame, and you cannot move behind that, because this is what righteousness demands, this is what would address the moral situation. So if you look through all this, always values have played a large part. Now, what are values? It can be religious values, it can be moral values, it can be fiscal values. So at each period, depending on the interaction, depending on the kind of life that people led, these values had an impact on how they would behave, and that again impacted how people started thinking about the legal system. So the positive law then came about where people started thinking that should we just abide by a religious law or by what is ordained as a universal order, or should we have something else? So, what they thought was there must be a recognized authority, there must be something that makes it legitimate, and morality doesn't come into it at all. It has to be a strict enforcing authority which could help people to understand that they cannot move beyond these boundaries. So the French Code Civil came later on, and they had done a depth in-depth study of various challenges, and they came up with a structure which they thought would address everything. On the other hand, the Germans who looked at it said, no, we are not totally in sync with what these people have done. We would like to have a different version of it. On the other hand, what the Normans had brought into and the Anglo-Saxon law had done, and the Chancery courts had come up, what happened was the equity played a greater role there, and the law developed to such an extent it became the common law form there, whereas the French had the civil law. We in India and most of the East also have had a lot of customary law which is in place. So all this have been evolving as individual structures, and if you see that the nature of the evolvement of these structures, you will find that over a period people understood, because especially in India, if you find the Britishers came in, and they, especially the East India Company came in, and they realized that they couldn't understand what was the customary law here. So they said there are too many people, too many castes, and what are they doing with this? We don't understand this. So we want something to be different. So they brought in arbitration to understand, because they had trade here. That was in a very preliminary form. And arbitration has been happening with the Romans also, but in a different manner. So what happened was, once they understood that this is not working, they wanted again a system that was different. So arbitration came in, conciliation happened later on, and that took a different trajectory, although they put in a legal system there. So mediation, or attempt to have a dialogue, somewhere lost its face. It was not recognized at all. As I said, in the West, people who went to America, they also found out that they had to understand the nature of the law, because they had the natives there, they had the systems of practice there. They started understanding that their society was different from what was in Britain. So they wanted to, and even between Britain and Scotland, they had different ideas. So once they went there, they had a different idea. So they said, our society is different. So we have to understand what is the role of law in our society, and we have to have a different system. So in all this, if you find that there was a recognition that yes, there are systems put in place to punish or to keep people in order, but that is not really doing its job that it was supposed to do. And that is where, especially after the Industrial Revolution, conciliation came up. They understood that power imbalance had to be dealt with in a different way, and people started having a dialogue in a sense, although there were strictures about the process. So you had arbitration also going on, you had litigation, and you had conciliation also. So when these processes were developing, what was happening was the innate sense that we have of negotiation, because we tend to influence the other to get what we want. That is a natural human ability. So this negotiation, which is more of persuasion, or because of power it could be coercion, or in a way, negotiation is not only an interaction between two people, it is having an advantage. Once you have some sort of resource, or you have something in your power to say that you can get what you want, you tend to stick on to that to find out whether the other person will give in. So again, this negotiation, while it formed part of all this, didn't really take a deep root until mediation again surfaced. And for that, we have to thank people like Roscoe Pound, who thought that this was not enough. We have to change the system. We have to find out how the real legal system can be augmented by better systems in place. And that is when they thought about having mediation, or they thought about approval of a dialogue. I would say more of an approval of a dialogue. But is that really satisfactory? What has happened? So, over the period, was that only for civil disputes? All those questions were there. So, over the period, what happened was they found that in criminal jurisprudence, especially, there is a lot of need to rehabilitate people. Just by punishing people, it can't be helped. And as Confucius and Patanjali said long ago, they found that just having strict laws were not enough. We need something else. So, what do we do? So, a system of plea bargaining came up to find out when all those are ordinary crimes, how can it be dealt with? And that is when the thought about what is happening to the victim in this criminal jurisprudence also came about. Everybody was thinking only about the offender, what to do with the offender, why did he commit this wrong? Did he understand what he was doing was wrong? Or what was the impact of this wrong on the victim? Nobody realized. And today, a lot of work is being on restorative justice in Australia. And to a certain extent, in California, there's a lot of scope for this victim offender mediation. It hasn't taken off much in other places, but people have started, small minor offenses. People can sit and talk to the offender and find out whether he can do some social work or contribute in some way so that that person understands that what he has done is not the right thing. So again, there's a thread of psychology in this. And to a certain extent, people do say that restorative justice is a therapeutic justice, but it has its origin, again, if you see, in Africa, where they had this principle of Ubuntu, which is also found in a way in South America, where if there was a murder, the whole community would apparently sit around the dead body, and they would wait for the person. I mean, the whole village would sit there, and they would wait for the person who had committed the crime to admit. Even if it takes a week, they would sit there. So ultimately, when people start talking and they are listening, the person who has done it, maybe out of valid reason also, then he would come out and say that, and then they go and bury. So what does this give? This gives a sort of a finality to the feelings that have come up. We won't have the kind of honor killings that we have today, or other kind of hate crimes that we have today, because that has increased a lot. But this is the reason, this is the basis for which restorative justice has come up now. It is a faction of equity jurisprudence, because they have understood that just punishing a person is not enough. We have to do something more. Now, if we look at this, what have we understood? Now, arbitration was there mainly for commercial disputes. Then parties chose to go out of the regular legal system to go to a private system where they could choose the person who would decide. But then again, there was proof necessary. There was a system that was to be followed. Again, the disputants lost control over whatever was happening. In conciliation, to a certain extent, there was negotiation. People would come to a point where they are not able to agree, and they had this third party who could make a suggestion, who could tell them, okay, this is best for you, and they could accept it. Again, there was negotiation, but there was not a dialogue which was happening between them, which could help them to understand what was the real situation. Now, that is why all this has evolved into the present stage of mediation. Of course, mediation has various forms today. You have evaluative mediation, you have facilitative mediation, you have transformative mediation, where Fisher and Urey have said that you must move the people from the person to the problem. We have to focus on what is the issue there. We have to see the underlying issue there. We have to help them to understand what would satisfy their needs and not their wants. And all this you'll be learning over the next few days. But what I want to focus on now is that why is mediation evolving today in the way it is? Because we have tried out various systems, and as Anil Srivastava was saying before, the Samadhan Veda Danda, the process where you have different approaches to situations, has brought us to a stage where we understand that it is our duty to first respect the other person. It is our duty to understand what are our needs. See, I may think that I have to go to court because my neighbor says I have to go to court, or my friend says I have to go to court, or that is a general understanding. I need to go to the police station to make a complaint because I think I have been wronged. But have I stopped to ask why this wrong was committed or how this could have been avoided? Maybe I was also responsible. And that is the basis of the Eastern philosophy in a way. Because first you have to recognize what is the problem, then you have to reflect on it. And once you reflect on it, you will be able to respond to it. Whereas what was happening in the litigation system, as Mr. Kokram was saying yesterday, was you are reacting to the situation. Yes, he put up a fence, he put up a gate, and he locked it. So I go to court and I say, look, this man has offended me. He has taken away my right of access to that particular place. But whereas, if I had stopped to talk to the neighbor, I would have found out that he didn't want stray animals to come in or somebody else coming into the property and he wanted to protect that pathway. And he was prepared to give me the key the next day, but I had rushed to court the previous day itself. So, mediation today we find has gained traction mainly because we have started understanding that it's not enough just to go with proof or find out what is right or establish what we think is the truth, because we ourselves really don't know what is the truth, but we are fighting for something on the basis of what we think is our right or our entitlement, and we are fighting because we think that the law is supporting us and we can ask for it, whereas it may not be really what we need, and we may have an alternative or we may have an advantage by collaborating with someone. See, what was once considered as a traditional way of succession to a property or keeping the property within the family today has changed into developing the property, into distribution to other things, and to find value of that property. Similarly, in other fields also. So, in mediation, what is happening is parties are coming together to find out what is the, they may come with a claim, but they will find out what is the value that they can get out of this particular dialogue, or what is the value that that situation offers to them which they can hold on to. So the system itself now is where the parties have to take responsibility for the action. They have to come and have a dialogue, they have to decide. Now what was the movement from negotiation to here? Negotiation is one point where I try to talk to the other person, but I'm always trying to get the best advantage for myself. I'm really not listening to the other person. Then from there we have moved into arbitration or litigation. Litigation, of course, we all know. But in arbitration, again, what is happening? I am giving my set of claims, the other person is giving his set of claims, and somebody is deciding on it based again on a procedure. In conciliation, what is happening is somebody is listening to both of us and saying, okay, now why don't you, there must be redistribution of these assets like this. Why don't you have? It's more of a distribution or to find out who can have an advantage there. Whereas in mediation, what is happening is I take the problem into my hands and I find out how I'm going to solve it. I'm not giving it to somebody. So first I have responsibility towards a problem. The next is I realign my thoughts because I see the other person as my neighbor, as my brother, as my superior, as the person with whom I'm doing business. I want to do business, so I want to restore this relationship. So what I do is I respect that person as the entity with one set of problems similar to what I have. And so I start having a dialogue. When I have this dialogue, what happens is I realign my thought. When I do that, what happens is I find options. So from the Roman law praetor to the chancery courts where the chancellor had a chance to, was given the right to decide the cases, to the development of natural law, to the French Code Civil, to the German Civil Code, to whatever were the changes subsequently that brought about various laws in various countries. Because even though in the Commonwealth most of us have followed what the British tradition set in for us, we have moved away from there to suit our exigencies also. But this is again dependent on the culture. But what is happening throughout is that we have only thought about how people can live in harmony, how there can be a formal, constructive way of looking at things. Mediation has offered that. Mediation has offered a flexible process. Mediation says, no, you don't need to follow a procedure as long as it is legitimate. You can sit and talk to each other, but you're going to be the person who decides whether it is going to be suitable for you. If you decide, then you make a commitment. So what happens is, from the anxiety and feelings that Marlon spoke about, from the defensive state, what we have done is we move to the place where we respect the other person, we realign our value, our needs, we realign the perspectives of whatever has happened, and we take responsibility for the problem. Once we take responsibility for the problem, what happens is there is a commitment to see that it is done. Whereas in other processes, that may not happen. Again, there is a right of appeal or going further on. But here, what happens is, I have agreed to do something, so I'm going to do it. So, this personal responsibility again is the moral order that that Plato was talking about, or Confucius was talking about. So, we have gone full circle in a way, because we have now understood that taking responsibility to find that our conscience is clear or what we want is more important than anything else. Frank Sanders, as you know, who has been a leading light in mediation, he says in any resolution, irrespective of the process that we follow, what is most important is first we have to understand the nature of the dispute. What is a kind of problem that the people are coming with? They would say it's a problem. It may not be a problem. So you diffuse it by saying, let's not look at it as a problem. Let's look at it as a situation. So then they start understanding the contours of whatever has happened there. Then you look at the relationship. Is this relationship something that is going to survive? Has it got to be sustained? Then you think of the cost in terms of time and money. Whether this continuing with this kind of a dispute or what shall I say, incongruent behavior is going to affect those parties. Then finally, what are the implications by not finding out options to have a better deal? So he says there are promising avenues to explore. Mediation has showed us the way. In a way, mediation has opened up the door for parties to find a final solution to whatever is is the situation that they are facing. But it's not the ultimate. He says all these dispute resolution problems are not absolute panaceas. They are promising avenues to explore. And there's so much we do not know. And I think that is most important. We have to realize that human behavior or the culture or the society's needs are evolving. And there is so much that we don't know today. And we have to understand that even though we may be an efficient mediator, we may enjoy doing mediation, and we may be looked up to as a very good mediator, there is so much to know and there is so much to learn. Because as Mr. Anil Srivatsa was saying, not only is there a historical foundation for law, this legal culture reflects the society's perception of law. And there is definitely a role of law in our everyday life, starting from negotiation or how we deal with human behavior. So it's not just retribution that will help. We have to understand that somewhere along the line, we have to find satisfaction for the parties. You may go up to the highest court of the land, get an order in your favor, and still not be happy. Is that what law was ordained for? It was not for that. It was a system that was put into place to understand the moral and cultural needs of the parties and to address the situation that they were facing. Putting it into a perspective of just addressing the legal requisites that would satisfy their claims and the proofs that they were, corresponding proofs that they could offer, and giving a decision based on that may, even to the person who is, and the authority who is giving that decision, may not be satisfying, but his hands or her hands would be tied. But whereas in mediation, what happens is the mediator is looking at the parties as people, looking at them as individuals who have to be respected. And once the mediator starts this, sets up this rapport and then communicates this respect for the other person, the disputants who are on the either end of the spectrum start respecting the views of each other, and they listen to each other and they come up with solutions, they come up with different options. So for that, the mediator has to be trained, as Chief Justice Ramana was saying, and it has been repeated many times also. A very good training and learning, continuous learning, is very, very essential. But what I would say is that unless we understand that the person who has come to us when we are a lawyer or as a mediator has come with a problem, he has come uh, with a situation that is hurting him. So unless, as Chief Justice Venkatachalaya has said, unless we understand the pain of the litigant, we will not be able to help them. So the first step is we have to understand the pain of the litigant, convey to them that we have understood their pain, and then the parties take over. They respect each other, they listen to each other, and the various techniques that you would get to hear through the next few days will make you understand how this mediation works. Now, I have not gone into the other systems because of lack of time, but I would say that you can't rule out the other systems because we are saying mediation is good. As Roscoe Pound said, this is not a complete panacea. We are here to explore and help to grow this as a very, what shall I say, as a very satisfying system that enables people to find satisfaction from the situation that they find themselves in. So thank you. Any questions? I'll be pleased to answer.
Sir, some people have raised their hands, so if we could,
you can call them. That would be better.
you could unmute them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there are a lot of questions on the chat.
Okay, we'll try to address as much as possible.
And so shall we take the question on the chat first, ma'am?
Okay.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions on what is the difference between mediation and arbitration, conciliation, litigation. Well, let me tell you, this will be all your doubts on this will be answered tomorrow, because this is precisely the topic tomorrow. But the topic for the session tomorrow is the differences between mediation, conciliation, arbitration, litigation. So I think most of these doubts will be cleared tomorrow. Now, ma'am, another question which has come and which is troubling, I think, many of the young lawyers and students. Where can internship in mediation be done?
It's a very valid question. I have
Yes.
interns too, but after this COVID, we have not encouraged anybody to come because we ourselves don't have any work now, practically, and we don't want anybody to be exposed to certain things. Yes, some of us have private mediation centers, but again, people are hesitant to use the private mediation. Still, court annexed is part of it. See, again, I didn't want to go into that, but because you said that, I would say this. Maharashtra largely has trained judges as mediators. In Delhi also you have a lot of judges as mediators. But in most of the states there are only advocates who are mediators. And now there is a study internationally also to say that when a judge is a mediator, then unconsciously the disputants feel a certain pressure to settle in a particular manner. So it becomes more like conciliation. So in one of the JAMS programs, when Judge Weinstein was talking, he said he is a judge who has moved out of being a judge to being a full-time mediator. And he says, look, as a mediator, I tell them what to do, and they go back home to tell their family that the judge has said that so it must be right. But I don't think that is mediation. So in a way, yes, evaluative mediation is, when we study all that, you'll know the difference. But yes, internship is a little problem today, unless in Madras High Court we allow interns to come inside the High Court, and most of us are doing mediation through the day there, and so they will have opportunity to come and watch mediations. The only problem is if you're just here for a month, you may not be able to follow up after that. That's the only thing.
There is another very, very interesting question.
Yeah.
And this is, if mediation is centuries old, and I think both of us just went through the history of how it is centuries old. So the question is that if mediation is centuries old, did it fail, or why did it fail as a dispute mechanism so as to give rise to adversarial litigation?
That's a very interesting question, and I was trying to actually analyze and read on that. My assessment, is yeah, our way of life has changed. Again, it's culture. Culture has a large impact. With trade, people imbibe different cultures, so they wanted different things, and so they moved away from. See what happened in India, especially. People were listening to elders. Even in China, even today, evaluative mediation makes more sense to them because one is they are not supposed to lose face. Lose face in the sense that you cannot get away with making a wrong statement. And if you don't settle or if you don't listen to the elder, it appears as if you're disrespecting them. So you have to do certain things. So again, because of that culture, the mediation culture there itself is totally different. Now, in various countries, it has changed. And finally, although Roman law had this prey right, no, why they moved on to a system? Mainly, I think it is because of trade. They had to have a system in place so that international disputes could be handled. And so they moved away from whatever was a dialogue or looking at the larger picture, let's say. In India, especially, we had gone through a system, gone through various people coming to rule us. And so we had the Mughals come here and they had a system, they had their own court. All this Tahsildar and the rest of it is all because of the Persian impact. And then later on, when the Britishers came in, as I said, the East India Company decided to have arbitration because they just couldn't understand the culture and the language and the caste business here. So they wanted totally a different, they wanted a system that they would understand. And so they put it in place. So all our laws, right from, you will see that has developed only after the Britishers came in. And recently, I think even for the sedition law, our Chief Justice has said that it is an archaic law or brought in by them, so why should we have it still? But there are very good legislations that have come in because of the Britishers also. Lord Macaulay was a reason why we had a very good system put in place. But then I think it is because people didn't want to listen to another. People were looking at passing on the problem to somebody else. They didn't want to take responsibility for the decisions. And also, it was more of social acceptance. And once people started going to court, and there were those Dubashis who could explain what was said by the Englishmen, and they felt that you have to live like an Englishman. Now, why did we have the probate law in India? We had different succession, patterns according to the religion that a person followed. Now, we had a succession law brought in only because the Britishers were here. So, in various countries, it has taken a move like that. So, it's a very good question that has to be researched on. Yeah.
Well, there's another question which says, and she's asking, does morality play a role during the mediation process?
Very difficult. Yes, it is. See, what happens, let's say ordinary, a divorce mediation I'm doing, and I'm naturally thinking that a woman shouldn't be harmed, but the man thinks that it's okay to beat his wife. Now I'm going to think, why, my God, what are you doing? Or how can you think like that? But if you are not neutral, the parties will sense it even if you don't say. So that is where a mediator has to learn to be totally neutral. We may have our own views. There may be a moral tendency to uh, conclude certain things, but yes, also on the other side, uh, they have the parties themselves may have some moral values which would affect the way that they think. For example, again in domestic cases, if you find a lot of Catholics would come and say, "No, our church will not allow it, so I will not agree for a divorce." So it's religious also, but there are also moral values attached to that. It is because of the moral values that society is evolving, and it is because of that we have today the Domestic Violence Act or acceptance of living together, and various things that would, or even understanding gay relationship or adoption for various people. All that has happened only because of change in moral values. So yes, moral values do have an impact. That is why we have to understand how the culture in that area has developed and what is the impact of that culture in that particular society.
Well, there are a lot many people who have raised hands. Now, how can we unmute them? Rahul? One by one, Mr. Chirag was the first one who raised his hand.
Okay.
So can we unmute Mr. Chirag, please?
Mr. Chirag, you can unmute yourself. You have the access.
Mr. Chirag,
Unable to hear?
okay. I think maybe something wrong in the system. Then there is Sneh Yadav. Could you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. Good evening to everyone, and especially good evening to ma'ams. Thank you so much for a wonderful insight into mediation. Now, my question actually revolves around something which is of great concern in the process of mediation, and something which was highlighted by Chief Justice Ramanna also. One inherent problem which we find in mediation is with regard to the fact that a lot of times it is not a level playing field where the parties are actually in unequal or unequal positions. For example, if you take a dispute between an employee and an MNC, which as an employer, so if they go for a mediation, the employee is as such intimidated and not actually, so free to mediate, but still under some duress of pressure, he would mediate. Now, as a mediator, can you narrate some, ma'am, could you just narrate any anecdote or any experience that you had where you were able to kind of pacify or convince that person and actually, bring it into a successful mediation rather than being a forced mediation?
Yeah, it happens, and sometimes this power imbalance, as you said, could be very difficult to handle, and because of that, we won't be able to get a settlement. Also, yeah, it works both ways. But first, we have to understand that unless both parties are willing for a change, if they want to change the situation, we can have a proper negotiation, and from there you understand the power imbalance, and then you can go on. See, though strictly, it was not. I would say it was for trademarks actually, but it was not actually for a trademark dispute. They were selling agarbattis, and one person could make perfumes, and the other person was marketing it. They were good in their own way. Somewhere along the line, they had a problem, and various suits were filed against each other, damages and trademarks and all that. Then, when we were having the discussion, I found that the person who was making the perfumes was actually suffering from cancer, and he was in dire straits. He didn't have enough money, and he didn't want to go through the litigation. He wanted to settle. He was desperate, and the other man knew it. He knew that he didn't have any source of income, and he was trying to play on that. So during the course of the discussion, when we started talking, so we have different. The process tells you how you have separate sessions and joint sessions and all that. So when we were having the joint separate sessions, I asked this man, "Now, how did you come into this business?" So he said he came to know about my perfumes, and he approached me to sell it in the Middle East and Far East and all that. And see, he's capable of making new perfumes and all that. So he was just an ordinary person in a small shed making these things when this man approached him, and now they have made it into a very good business. So when I asked him, he said, "See, I'm really grateful to him, but for his marketing, I wouldn't have time. My daughters are in college, but it's just that I don't have money for the treatment." And he is now doing this. He's filed the suits, and I'm not able to market whatever I'm producing also. So I went back to the other person and said, "See, he's very appreciative of you and your family supporting him, bringing up to this state, and he's really happy that his daughters have been educated because of this. Now his daughters have to get married, and he needs money for the treatment. And obviously, you've had a good relationship. So what happened for you to fall apart?" So, the way you put it, you rephrase whatever was the unhappiness with the other person and all that. So, this person listened to it and he said, "No, he was my friend, and I knew that he had tremendous talent, and I knew how to market. That's why I did." But then he went and sold one perfume to somebody. That's why. So, he said, "I'll do something because this business I'm doing with somebody else, I cannot really offer him a place back, but I can do this for him." So, we went back and discussed, and then we found a solution at the end of it, and this man was able to die peacefully at least. That was one big thing that I thought that came out of this mediation. But I agree, in many mediations, once that person knows, and especially when it goes into the appellate stage and they have a decree in their favor, the power balance will shift, and there is going to be a difference, especially today with builders and purchasers of property. There is a lot of problem there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Suruchi ma'am, your question.
Good evening. Thank you, ma'am, for such a wonderful lecture. Ma'am, I wanted to ask you and your perspective on it. Where would you draw a line during the mediation? The parties are not agreeing to a settlement. You've tried everything, sound, down, and bid. Now, where would you draw the line? In ADR, ODR, London also, when I took that one little training apart from what you trained as, there they said you mustn't give up. Of course, they don't mean that you just go on. We don't have marriage counselors, at least the Supreme Court Mediation Center doesn't have. We have family disputes, and sometimes they can be really difficult. How do you draw a line? Do you go on and on, not give up on them? 10 sittings, 15 sittings.
I understand that becomes a big problem, especially in India, because you can go and file a dowry complaint, you can file a domestic complaint, all that goes on. Nobody's bothered about perjury. Now, yeah, sometimes people stick to their positions and they don't want to move. But then you go back again to find out why they are sticking to this position. For example, because you are referring to marital relationships, I'm currently doing a mediation where both of them are married for the second time, and they have tried to make the marriage work and it is not working. But he thinks it's okay. So the problem has been intimacy. Now he refused to come for mediation, but I just said come for one session to understand what it is. Then he was sort of looking around everywhere around the room than me. Then second time he came, and then he said after he was listening to her, and I mean the conversation that I had with her, I was sort of rephrasing and putting it in a very positive perspective. And at the end of it, he said, now I understand. I thought that she was happy with me, and now I understand that she's not so happy with me. So I gave him a chance to go back for 10 days to think about the whole thing, and then I talked to him. Now I find he's been abused as a child. He's still not admitting it. He's been abused as a child. So he wants to have control over everything. So as you said, we need a psychologist. In many cases, we do need a psychologist sometimes. But somewhere, that is why psychology also interests me. Sometimes behavioral patterns we will not be able to understand. As Malan says, this anxiety, feelings and defense. See, most of the time I have a narrative in my mind. I have a problem with my neighbor. I think this is where my boundary wall has to come. I've already decided that this person is an irrational person. So I go only to that frame. So there is anxiety that I may lose. What are people going to think about me? And then I'm defensive when the other person starts talking itself. And I don't want to lose. Whereas in most of the Indian situations, if you see, whether I win or not, I want that person to be hurt. So we have to overcome that part of it before we have a valid dialogue. So that is a challenge for us. And that is where culture also comes in. The challenge and the response that we can build because of the culture will shift the paradigm. Yeah.
Dr. Vikas Sharma, your question.
Ma'am, my question is, thanks for the lovely lecture today. So my question is very simple. There was in 2019, we had the Singapore mediation convention, which India missed. We missed that bus. So what impact is it going to have on the the way the mediation thing develops in India? And can we still catch the bus, or have we missed it forever? Is there something we can do?
So it is still in the stage where we are exploring, sir, because that was basically for enforcement of international agreements. Okay. Now, people are still hesitant. I mean, that's my personal opinion, because people are still hesitant to come to the private arena for, mediation. Like, there have been queries, people writing to me asking me whether you can mediate this dispute I have with my brother or with my partner, the business partner and all that. But you send a notice, they don't reply at all, because the lawyer to whom they go, the lawyer says, no, you don't need to answer, you don't need to go. If they come to court, let's see to it. So again, a cultural and behavioral pattern is behind how it is helping mediation to evolve or to obstruct it also. And as I said, unless that person is willing to come, they want a change and they have a dialogue and they come to an agreement, there won't be commitment. So there's no point merely by pulling two people and getting an agreement also, which happens most often in mandated cases. Yeah.
Okay, participant Shanti, I see you raised your hand. Could you ask your question, please? Okay, since we're running short of time, Mr. Mihir. Mr. Mihir, please unmute yourself.
I think
Yeah.
Yes, good evening, madam. Thank you so much for an excellent lecture. It was really enlightening. First of all, madam, the previous question, he said that the convention was not signed, but it seems like India is a signatory to the Singapore Convention. So I guess the bus has not been missed. My question actually is, madam, you have taken us through different cultures and how the legal system essentially developed over a long period of time. But mediation as in Indian culture, does it even exist? There have been examples given of gram panchayats, but no, there is a decision given there. So that can't be mediation. The Honorable, the Chief Justice of India referred to Krishna going to the Kauravas in Mahabharata, but again, he went as a negotiator and not a mediator. So do we find any example of mediation in the Indian culture, whether in literature or whether in real life?
A lot of the traditions, like I said, like Yajnavalkya or the others, Patanjali and all, they refer to situations where they say that it is better for people to have a dialogue. And there is one whole system called the Tarka Shastra, which I was fortunate enough to listen to lectures by Justice B.N. Krishna. He did it for the Maharashtra National Law School. It was wonderful. He spoke about how your perceptions are developed, how people handle dialogue and all that. And there they say that the whole system itself is about how a conversation has to go on, or how do you understand the meaning of a conversation. And there he says that it is important to understand not just the word or the way it is, but the conjunction of words together, how they are expressed, as we say in our communication training, and also to understand in what context it was said. So there has been a lot of literature on this, but practical instances I haven't honestly I haven't read much. But what I heard was there was a system which later developed into the panchayat, but panchayat was again because people wanted somebody in authority. See, like the Chinese system where people could go to their elders, in the East it was always felt that in the family again the oldest person was the person who would decide for everyone. In the village elder would decide. In the community elder would decide. So they naturally progressed towards this kind of a panchayat. That's why they had 5 people also. They felt that these people, so it was more of a conciliation at that time. But as you said, in Mahabharata, it was only negotiation. What Krishna does is only goes and does a negotiation. It's not mediation. Mediation has happened where they, like the Solomon story, where this 2 women were fighting for the. They have stories in our Puranas also, where they say that 2 women were asking for the child, and even in Akbar's court, they say Birbal said this. So I don't know whether it is more of folklore or whether those things really happened, but there are instances that people do indicate. Yeah.
Okay. Srirag, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. For the wonderful session. Ma'am, you said some factors in relation to mediation in personal laws, especially the example where the church doesn't allow for the divorce and factors like that. As we all know, there are so many personal laws in India that is in relation to marriage, divorce, and everything. So my question is, would having a uniform civil code in personal laws, would it facilitate the whole process of mediation when it comes to marriage or divorce or adoption, such kind of factors? That's my question, ma'am.
No, I think it's binary. Yeah, we do need a common law for all that. Common civil code would see in every other country when people go, they abide by that law. But coming to India, they say we have religious perception, so we have to have a different law. I don't understand that attitude. Anyway, that is my personal opinion. But yes, we do need some sort of a cohesive thing for that. But whether it would help mediation, I think again it is the culture or how you are able to understand and respect the needs of the other person. That is why the development of law itself is based on see today, if you see the way the media has developed or the internet has developed, access to internet has developed. Now what is happening? You think it is all right. For example, today there is a censorship of films. But on the OTT platforms, is there a censorship? So anything can be shown. Why? Because you are accessing the internet and you feel that you have a right to see it. So what happens is you imbibe a different culture, you think it is okay to view it, but then your moral values, which is supporting your system there, has a different value. So these value systems itself are discordant today. They will have to align themselves together to come, then mediation would be possible.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Kartikeya, are you there? Okay. Mr. Vinod Kumar
Yes, sir. Good
Agarwal.
evening, sir. Good evening.
Okay. Mr.
Good evening, sir.
Kartikeya.
I am Karthikeya here.
Okay.
Yeah. Good evening, ma'am. First of all, I would like to thank you for delivering such a lovely session. Ma'am, I have one doubt in my mind. Ma'am, actually, I am having a standing of at least 9 years in the bar, and I have undergone a training of 40 hours of mediation training conducted by the institute. My query is that, ma'am, whether ADR, PG diploma in ADR will be beneficial. Actually, I want to looking career in making a mediation. I want to become a mediator, means certified mediator or successful mediator. So it's good for us to do PG diploma in ADR, or because as we have already studied arbitration, mediation, conciliation subject in final year in our LLB. Yeah, ma'am, can you write?
Yes, sir. I think I can answer it like this. A mediation or any, professional activity, I think, involves continuous learning. Just as even in our legal profession, you have to keep yourself updated with the latest laws or the latest rulings. Now, why did we move from the strict laws to this common law? Because you wanted something more than the interpretation of the strict rules. Now, mediation is another process which where you are leaving it to parties to decide. And so, for it to develop as a profession, it's going to take some time. It has evolved from where it was today. But if you're going to be a full-fledged mediator on your own, it may take some time for you to build a practice because people still are hesitant to accept the form of resolution. But today, I didn't want to go into it because tomorrow you'll be dealing with all this. There is a combination of MEDAB, ArbMed. There are so many things that are going on. And when, especially with the kind of pandemic situation that has been going on, and people are frustrated because they can't approach the courts easily or get things done fast, or by way there is a delay in litigation, they are slowly moving towards asking for a dialogue. So I think it will come about, but it's going to take some time. Yes, it will evolve as a profession on its own, and it will be very fruitful also.
Ms. Radhika.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, ma'am, for this lecture today. I have this question. If mediation is something which someone should resort to before approaching the regular courts, which we have, for which we have a defined set codified procedure, and in absence of such codified law, we have already given birth to one orthodox form of mediation, that is Khap Panchayats. Is there a need to have a codified law for mediation?
Actually, there is work going on. One of my colleagues has also been working on that. There is a draft mediation law which has been drafted. But internationally, there is a debate also going on whether we should have a law, because again, it will put it into a strict frame.
Absolutely.
I personally feel there must be regulations. Because given the conditions that we are in today, all and sundry can call themselves mediators and pass orders. Because generally what happens now is, especially in India, if we do a private mediation, we pass it as an arbitral award on accepted terms. So what happens? It becomes final. So somewhere along the line, we have to have regulations. Yes, they are working on the law, and I think once it comes out, we may know how we are going to proceed with it.
And if we have a codified law for that, how is it different from regular court procedure?
Yeah, that is why, see, if you see Philippines or Ireland and all that have framed the laws, but it's more of regulations. They are trying to address certain situations. Like, for example, we say in mediation, the whole thing is confidential. So when parties are giving you information, either in the joint session or in the separate session, and they don't want it to be disclosed, especially in business disputes, when they want to keep even the agreement confidential, they don't want certain things to come out into the public arena. That can be safeguarded only in mediation. But Ireland's report, when they were structuring this mediation law, they went into it when they said once it affects a child or interests of the child, then what they call is the mediator's privilege. All there's a lot of areas that we can discuss. But there they say in certain situations where a harm can happen because of whatever is the dialogue that is going on between the parties, the mediator is bound to disclose it to the concerned authority. What if one person says, I'm going to murder him if he doesn't accept this, and next year there's a murder? Then actually there's a dilemma, there's an ethical situation there. So all those are areas that we will have to face, yes. But
Okay.
putting it into a strict legislation, yes, I have my own qualms too.
Okay, so much as we would like to take as many more questions as possible, but I think we just have time for 2 more questions. Sangeeta ma'am.
Hello, sir.
One second, just one second, just Sangeeta ma'am, I'll just call you, sir.
Hi, Uma. It was wonderful. It's as always listening to you. I just want to know about how to get the other party on board. I mean, sometimes they abuse us as mediators, why we are sending them notice or trying to talk to them just to communicate. It is absolutely, I mean, if there is no mandatory mandatory mediation does not mean that you have to sign on the dotted line, but at least you come and sit and talk.
No, that is why in Italy they have that opt-out model. They have to come to a session where they have to listen to what is mediation, then they can opt out. But as I said, in India, mostly they listen to their elders or they listen to a lawyer who says, no, you don't need to go. So they don't go. And that is why we are trying now to have programs for lawyers so that they understand what is mediation and they understand that it is better for them. Many of my colleagues here have started sending out notices saying, you come for a negotiation, to come for a mediation meeting so that we try to solve this issue. I think slowly it will develop, but yes. Yeah.
Okay, the last question, Mr. Agarwal.
Hello, sir. Hello, madam. Good evening, madam. Thank you very much for such a nice session. Now, my question is this, that as yesterday, Honorable Chief Justice has said that the next generation is for mediation, but how to approach a mediator? In so many small cities also, there are so many litigations, and if everybody wants to go to mediation, so how to get a good mediator and how to approach a mediator? This is a problem. Because in Delhi or Maharashtra, you can approach a mediator, but in there are so many cities and litigation in small cities also. Please guide in this regard. Thank you.
Sir, even in court annexed mediations, if you see, it is practically working only in cities. In taluka level or district level, it's not really working, though they are trained mediators. It's because people, even the lawyers who are trained as mediators find it difficult to go to the center at that time, or they have other problems there. Yes, private mediation has to develop, and just like a client comes to, I feel it's just like a lawyer is found by the client. You build a reputation over the years, and then people come to you. When they know that you are fair, you are able to handle their cases, you don't take advantage of their situation, that sort of a thing. So you build a reputation. Today, like we have FCDR, there are some institutions which have come up, and like CAMP in Bangalore and all that, and everywhere, AIMS in Bombay. So somewhere along the line, I think once this law also comes into place, we will have institutions that will come up, which will help to regulate, and people will get empaneled in these. See, for example, after this pandemic started, we in FCDR had an arrangement with a software company. It's a Just Act. It's called Just Act, and they wanted to go in for handling dispute resolution. So what they did was they developed the platform for this, and they got certain institutions to come on board, and we were doing the mediation for them. And they wanted us to get some more mediators for them also. So we did training for them. So that kind of thing can happen. But today with the pandemic, it's more of online mediation. So you'll be listening to Gunavati talk on that later. That really throws up a different kind of challenge today. Because one, internet access in many places is not there. See, I'm looking at you here. You're looking at me. Although it's not as good as we being in the same room.
Yeah.
But in some areas where internet is not good, they switch off their video or we don't get to see their faces. We're not able to. So most of it is observing their body language or listening to their tone and all that. And when voice breaks up or something happens, and confidentiality, we don't really know whether they are recording anything. So all those are factors for which we will, that's a different culture that is coming up. So we'll have to deal with it. Yeah, that's going to take some time.
So I think that brings us to the end of today's session. All the participants who raised their hands or asked questions on the chat, well, we are sorry that the constraints of time do not permit us to satisfy your questions. But thank you so much for your participation. Thank you, Uma ma'am, for such a great learning experience for all of us. Centuries of development of law, justice, equity, mediation. You condensed it into about just about 40 minutes for us. It's almost like a time travel for most of us. Thank you, participants, for your very patient presence and enthusiastic response. Tomorrow's session begins at 5 p.m. sharp. And the topic for tomorrow is introduction to mediation, the mediation process, differences between mediation, conciliation, arbitration, and litigation. So I'm sure many of you will have your doubts addressed tomorrow. And addressing you tomorrow will be Shri Sudhir Jain, District Judge of the Delhi, and a very seasoned mediator and a mediator trainer. Your host for tomorrow's session will be Shri Sandeep Narayan, a distinguished advocate and mediator of the Supreme Court of India. I will just like to add one thing for the benefit of all the participants, that the topics that we have chosen for this summer school are not just some random topics. All these topics follow a sequence. Like today was the historical perspective behind mediation. Tomorrow will be introduction to mediation, then the differences between mediation and arbitration and the other mechanisms. Then you will come to the online process, then advocacy. So there is a whole sequence. So I would urge you to please participate in all these sessions and not miss any one of them, or you just might break the link and feel a bit lost in the next session. So with that, I close the first session of the Summer School 2021.